its ideological perspective. But he says basically that given the amount of debt and the way the monetary system is constructed, and with impending resource shortages of overshoot related kind of things, that the system is due for a gigantic collapse. And the only political insight that I've had is that part of the hysteria of the Tea Party movement could easily be derivative of this kind of populist view that our monetary system is teetering. And so I'd love your insights or perspective.
I think the best way to deal with that is historically. Every time capitalism has hit a really bad, rough patch, as the British would call it, a crisis, a difficulty, there have been, like mushrooms after the rain, a spurt of theories to explain it. Understandable, people are frightened, they're shaken out of their normal sense that everything's kind of in order and I can plan my life and I kind of know what's going to happen. Suddenly you realize all bets are off, it's scary. So, for example, one of the most popular theories to come up with, and it's as old as I know human history and certainly the history of capitalism, is to decide that the monetary system is where everything is going to blow out of the water.
Or gold.
Gold, money, whoever issues money. So for example, I get, because I have a website and I'm running around, I get a lot of emails asking me to be more forthright than I am about the awful, horrible, conspiratorial evil perpetrated on the American people and the world by the Federal Reserve System. Then I get a long essay. The Federal Reserve System has too much power. It makes its decisions in secret. Some of this is correct. It certainly makes its decisions by itself. It doesn't publicize but a tiny portion of what they do, etc. But this notion of a demon out there who's pulling the strings and making it happen and who's about to let it all blow up, this is endemic. You know, like a broken clock, it can be correct twice a day. Broken clock is right on that, twice a day. So maybe they'll be right this time, who knows? My guess is though that our problem is systemic. We have a system whose various parts are not working and who are now undermining one another, these parts, rather than reinforcing and strengthening, which a healthy system does. And I think we'd be better off seeing how the different parts are interacting in such a way as to make the whole thing wobble, rather than looking for the demon. I don't think it's the bankers. I don't think it's the Federal Reserve. I don't think it's poor people who took out mortgages they couldn't afford. Are there poor people who took out mortgages? Absolutely. Are they part of the problem? Yes. Is the Federal Reserve? Mm-hmm. Are the banks? For sure. Is General Motors a phony, bankrupt corporation? In ways that are important? Yes. But you got to put those things together in a reasonable way of how they interact, rather than overloading the story to make the bad one this. But you will encounter them. There are, for example, people, I don't mean to suggest this about the fellow you spoke about, I don't know him, but there are people writing books, bestsellers, telling you about the impending crash. They're very big. You can buy them. They are selling millions of copies because people are terrified that that might happen. There are likewise people who are saying, there's never been a better time to go into the market right now. Everybody's afraid. If you do this, this, and this, you'll be a billionaire next year. Those are also bestsellers. They are a reflection of the times we're in. Everything is so uncertain and people are so frightened. You know, people just came through a period of time when they saw the value of whatever stocks and bonds they had really collapse, whether it's in their 401k pension plan or whether it's in their own portfolio. Those people who dare to even look. There was a phenomenon here in the United States, very famous, in 2009. It was discovered by Merrill Lynch and several others that the majority of the people to whom they were sending the monthly statements didn't open them. Because they had watched them for several months go down, they couldn't stand it. So they just piled up, unopened, in some corner until they were so high that you could finally get the courage to throw them out and never look at them. These are people who've been a little bit traumatized. You know, don't open your mail, look at it. It's not going to get worse because you look at it. They couldn't, and so they're very afraid they can see that happening again, and that fear is a motivator. But I don't think, I'd be careful about these kinds of, they're endemic to this situation. They always arise, and that means a healthy skepticism toward them is what I would recommend. Yeah.
How is the system going to absorb, and will be a crisis for capitalism, for peak oil? Because the curve of prices is not going to be, gentle rising, but parabolic in shape, and prices will go up high, and that cost push inflation. And can the system absorb it? Can you comment on it?
Yeah, peak oil is a concept, for those of you that are familiar with, basically that there's only a certain amount of oil available on the planet, and that at a certain point it's going to peak. Some people argue that point has already been reached, and that we're on the downside. We've passed the peak, we're back going down the mountain, and that as less and less supply is available and everybody needs oil, the price is going to go crazy. And since we've had already 2 or 3 spikes of the oil price, the question each time is, have we come to the peak? And are we now in that situation where, and I want to remind you, back in the 1970s when this stuff started, there were heavy predictions in major American newspapers that we were all going to freeze to death in a few years. There wasn't going to be enough oil to eat. It's a little hard to sustain these arguments now, having had so many years of doom and gloom being predicted that didn't materialize. So the question is, A, are we at peak oil? And that's being debated by people who think absolutely and people who think not. And some of those people are scientists trying to figure it out, and some of those people have a lot of money invested in one way or the other and are boosting their own situation. So it's hard to tell. It is clear that a number of governments think that peak oil has or will happen and are beginning the shift away, including the United States. But one of the decisions here in the United States that the Obama administration seems to have made is to resume the building of nuclear energy plants as a way to protect against an oil price spike by shifting the dependence away from oil and coal and onto nuclear energy. And there are countries in the world that have been banking on nuclear energy for many years now and feel very vindicated. France, for example, is dependent on nuclear energy. And there are other countries too, but I know it in the case of France. So I think that the peak oil, again, better put it in a larger framework. And also peak oil, some of the peak oil did not take into account the kinds of oil that are now being focused on. So we used to get the oil out of the ground, straight out as oil. We're not doing that now. The big future is from the Canadian, the sands and the shale. It's the oil that's in the layers of the mineral stuff. And they've now figured out ways to get that oil out, and no one quite knows what that will mean. And there are a few parts of the earth where they haven't quite looked really yet. The Soviet Union, Russia is a very big country, and there are large parts of it that haven't really been explored for yet, and Russia is already a major producer of oil and the world's biggest producer of gas. So when you look at all of the different energy sources, it's a little hard to see the imminence of this, although some of the people in peak oil do. And if it did happen, well, we might have some interesting consequences. For the first time, the irrationality of the individual automobile might finally be confronted on this planet. You all know, right? The automobile is the biggest single polluter of the air, the biggest killer and maimer of our people every year, much more than war or car accidents. It wastes resources, it pollutes the air, it makes us dependent on foreign energy using the oil. A mass public transportation system is infinitely more efficient. Little lesson to learn when someone tells you about how our system is so efficient. No, it isn't. We know exactly how to be an efficient transportation system, but we don't do it. If the price of energy goes crazy, we might finally have to do what otherwise would have been wise to do for other reasons decades earlier.
And the individual car, once you go outside New York, average working people, this is true, you've got to have it. It's
tremendous expense.
Cost, and that you pay on.
All right, folks, I think in the interest of your leaving, if you have a couple questions, come on up. I'd be glad to talk to you. Thank you again, and we will meet again March 22nd.